"You kissed me while I was out cold," the rancher asked. Apache girl reply, "I saved your life, sir." Rancher James Whitmore wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand, squinting against the glare. He had been on the ranch since sunrise, inspecting fences, checking the water troughs, and making sure the cattle were safe. Life on the ranch was never easy, but James loved it. The wide-open land, the smell of fresh hay, the sound of cattle lowing in the distance, it all felt like home. Still, the summer sun was harsh, and the heat pressed down like a heavy blanket. James was a man used to hard work. His hands were rough and calloused, proof of years spent wrangling cattle, fixing fences, and tending the land. He moved with a quiet confidence, knowing the terrain like the back of his hand. Today, however, he had ventured further than usual, toward a narrow canyon at the edge of his property. There had been reports from neighboring ranchers that a section of his fence had fallen, and James wanted to see it for himself. As he walked along the rocky path, the uneven ground made it easy to trip. Loose stones crunched under his boots, and James focused on keeping his balance. The canyon below was steep, its shadows stretching long across the dry earth. A sudden slip sent him tumbling forward. His hand caught on a sharp rock, and pain shot through his arm, but before he could steady himself, he fell hard onto the ground. The impact left him dizzy, and when he tried to get up, a wave of nausea hit him. His head throbbed, sharp and insistent, and for a moment he couldn't think clearly. The sun was relentless, beating down on him as he lay there. His mouth was dry and his throat felt parched. Panic began to creep in. He knew he couldn't stay on the canyon floor alone for long. The nearest town was miles away, and even if someone were coming, it could take hours before help arrived. James tried to stand again, leaning on his elbow, but the world tilted, and darkness edged his vision. He felt a wave of fear he rarely experienced, fear not for himself, but for the realization that the vast, open land he loved so much could be unforgiving in an instant. Meanwhile, not far from the canyon, Aeon, a young Apache woman, moved quietly through the desert landscape. She knew these lands better than most. Her family had lived here for generations, teaching her to read the signs of nature, to find water in the driest places, and to move with patience and precision. Today, she was collecting herbs that grew near the riverbed, delicate plants that could be used for medicine or food. Her dark hair was pulled back, and her eyes scanned the earth constantly, noticing every detail, the tracks of an animal, the shape of a cloud, the way the wind carried scents. As she walked, Aeon heard a faint sound that made her pause. It was subtle, almost drowned out by the wind, a groan, a whisper of distress. Her heart quickened. She was used to the quiet of the desert, and any sound that didn't belong immediately caught her attention. Moving carefully, she followed the noise, keeping low to the ground until she saw him. James was lying on the rocky canyon floor, his body awkwardly twisted. His eyes fluttered, trying to focus, but the bright sunlight made it hard to see. His skin was flushed from the heat, and he looked weak and vulnerable. Aeon didn't hesitate. She ran to him, checking quickly to see if he was breathing. Relief washed over her when she felt the rise and fall of his chest. He was alive, but only just. "Sir," she called softly, kneeling beside him. "Can you hear me?" James groaned, his voice barely audible. He tried to speak but coughed instead, dry and harsh. Aeon took a moment to assess him, her mind racing. His head injury worried her the most. A concussion in this heat could be dangerous, even deadly. She needed to act quickly. Aeon moved with calm efficiency. She gently lifted his head, supporting it as best she could, and looked around for anything that could help. She found her water bottle in her bag and carefully offered him a sip. He drank weakly, but it was enough to prevent further dehydration. She used her scarf to cushion his head against the rocks, then examined his arm. It wasn't broken, but the bruising was already forming. As she worked, she spoke softly to him, a mix of encouragement and reassurance. "You're going to be okay," she said. "I'm right here, just stay still." Her voice was calm, strong, and it seemed to anchor him in the moment. James, barely conscious, felt a strange comfort in her presence. Despite his fear and pain, her calmness was like a lifeline. Time passed slowly. The sun climbed higher and the heat became even more intense. Aeon knew she couldn't leave him, not for a moment. She checked his breathing, wetting a cloth with water and pressing it to his forehead to cool him down. Her hands were steady and her movements precise. Every action was deliberate, born of experience and knowledge. She whispered encouragement, telling him to focus on her voice, to keep breathing, to fight against the darkness threatening to pull him under. At one point, James stirred, his eyes blinking against the sunlight. His lips moved, forming words that didn't make sense. Aeon leaned closer, listening carefully. "You're going to be all right," she said. "I won't let anything happen to you." Her voice carried a quiet authority, one that seemed to cut through his confusion and fear. Then, instinctively, she did something she had done many times before for her people in similar situations. She pressed her lips gently against his forehead, a small gesture meant to give strength, comfort, and protection. It was not a kiss in the way many think. It was a blessing, a way to show care and help him focus his energy on recovery. For James, barely conscious and in pain, it was a strange but oddly reassuring sensation. As the day wore on, Aeon remained with him. She shaded him from the sun, monitored his breathing, and spoke softly to him to keep him alert. She thought about how dangerous it could have been if she hadn't found him in time. The desert was beautiful, but it was also merciless, and one wrong step could have ended his life. She felt a quiet satisfaction knowing she could help, even if she didn't know this man at all. By late afternoon, James began to stir more fully. His eyes opened and he looked around, confusion clouding his gaze. The first thing he noticed was Aeon sitting beside him, calm and watchful. He blinked, trying to focus on her face. The fear and pain from earlier were still there, but now there was also gratitude. "Who?" he began, his voice weak and raspy. "I'm Aeon," she replied gently. "I found you and helped you. You're going to be all right, sir." James tried to sit up, but she placed a firm hand on his shoulder to keep him still. "Not yet," she said firmly. "You need to rest." Her voice had no room for argument, and he realized it was best to follow her instructions. He settled back, his mind racing with questions, but he was too tired and too weak to ask them all. As the sun began to dip behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the canyon, James realized something important. He was alive against the odds, thanks to the quick thinking, courage, and kindness of this young Apache woman. And in that moment, he felt a deep, unspoken respect for her, a feeling that would only grow stronger in the days to come. Aeon stayed with him until the danger had truly passed, making sure he was hydrated, calm, and comfortable. She watched the sun set, thinking quietly about the day. It had started like any other, with her gathering herbs and moving through the desert. Yet somehow, it had turned into something much bigger, an encounter that could have changed two lives forever. And as the first stars appeared in the sky above the canyon, both James and Aeon knew that the events of that day would not be forgotten. One had been saved, the other had acted with courage, and a connection had formed in the harsh, beautiful wilderness of Arizona, one that would mark the beginning of a story neither of them could have predicted. James Whitmore's eyes slowly adjusted to the fading light of the canyon. He could feel the cool breeze moving across his face, a small relief after the scorching heat of the day. He was still weak, and his head throbbed with every pulse of blood, but the pain was bearable now. The first thing he noticed, though, was Aeon. She had not left his side, and her presence was steady, calm, and reassuring. There was something about her that immediately made him trust her, even though he barely knew her. "Where am I?" he asked, his voice hoarse from thirst and exhaustion. "You're safe," Aeon replied, her tone soft but firm. She had already guided him to a flatter area near a small overhang in the canyon, where the sun would not hit him directly. You fell and you hit your head. You needed care. I brought you here where it's shaded so the sun wouldn't make it worse. James tried to sit up again but felt a sharp sting in his arm and a dizzying wave in his head. Aeon immediately placed a hand on his shoulder. Don't move too fast, she warned gently. You need to rest. You lost a lot of energy. I'm going to take care of you. Despite himself, James felt a mix of embarrassment and gratitude. He had spent most of his life relying only on himself, and yet here was a stranger, a young woman, keeping him alive. His pride felt challenged, but his fear of the desert and the pain in his head left him no choice but to accept her help. Aeon's hands were skillful and steady. She checked the cuts and bruises on his face and arms, cleaning them carefully with water she had carried from a nearby stream. She wrapped his minor wounds with clean strips of cloth, ensuring that none of the rocks and dust would cause infection. Her movements were confident, showing experience beyond her years. James watched silently, impressed and quietly grateful. He had never seen anyone handle a situation like this so efficiently. I don't know how to thank you, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Aeon smiled slightly. You don't need to thank me, she said. I've learned to help when someone is in danger. That's what matters. Right now, you need to focus on getting better. James tried to stand again, a little stronger this time, but his legs wobbled and he had to sit back down quickly. Aeon didn't let go of his arm. We need to wait, she said firmly. Your body is weak and the sun is still strong. If we move too fast, you could faint again. He nodded reluctantly, realizing she was right. He had underestimated how much danger he had been in. The Arizona sun was beautiful but merciless, and without her, he might have been unconscious for hours, or worse. He couldn't imagine what might have happened if she hadn't been nearby. Aeon then began to make him comfortable. She used her scarf and some soft cloths from her bag to support his back and head, creating a makeshift pillow. Then she offered him water again, encouraging him to take slow, careful sips. He obeyed, feeling the liquid soothe his dry throat and revive his strength bit by bit. While he rested, Aeon looked around the area for anything that might help them. She found some loose branches and rocks and quickly built a small barrier to block the late afternoon sun. Then she gathered some dry grass to make a soft bed for him to lie on, showing attention to every detail. It was not just care. It was thoughtfulness and precision that made James feel safe. As he lay there, James couldn't help but notice her presence. Aeon moved with quiet confidence, her eyes always alert to their surroundings. She had a connection with the land that he had never seen in anyone else. She seemed to understand the desert, the wind, the sun, the rocks, even the faintest rustle of an animal. Watching her, he realized that she was not only helping him but also ensuring they were both safe in the canyon. Her intelligence and calmness impressed him more than words could express. Hours passed slowly, but in that time, a strange sense of trust developed between them. James, who had always been independent, had to rely on someone else completely. He had never experienced that before, and it left him feeling vulnerable but also grateful. He began to notice small things: the gentle way Aeon spoke, the careful way she moved, the way she never showed panic even when the situation could have been dangerous. At one point he tried to joke, despite his grogginess. "You kissed me while I was out cold," he murmured, his voice weak but tinged with disbelief. Aeon paused, looking at him seriously. Her dark eyes met his, steady and unflinching. "I saved your life, sir," she said simply. Her tone carried no shame, no embarrassment, only quiet pride. For her, the action had been natural, instinctive. For James, it was surprising, strange, and somehow comforting all at once. He had never thought a simple gesture could carry such weight, and now he understood that it had been more than a gesture. It had been a promise of protection. The evening grew cooler, and the sun dipped further behind the canyon walls. Shadows stretched long, and the air was filled with the soft sounds of the desert. distant birds, the whisper of the wind, and the faint rustle of small animals moving in the brush. Aeon stayed close, continuing to check his condition, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any danger. Her attentiveness reassured James more than he could say. Eventually, hunger became noticeable. James hadn't eaten since morning, and the physical exertion of walking and the fall had left him weak. Aeon reached into her bag and pulled out some dried corn and nuts she had gathered earlier in the day. She offered them to him, explaining how to eat slowly so he wouldn't upset his stomach. The simple meal was enough to give him some energy back, and he realized how careful she had been to think of every detail, from hydration to nutrition to rest. As night fell, Aeon prepared a small fire to keep them warm and provide some light. She knew how to do it without attracting unwanted attention or causing danger in the dry canyon. James watched, amazed at how self-sufficient and knowledgeable she was. He had spent all his life on this land, yet her skills and connection to it were something entirely different, something he admired deeply. By the time the stars appeared in the sky, James was feeling stronger. He could sit up more easily, and his head didn't throb as much. He turned to Aeon, who was watching the fire with calm focus. "I don't know what I would have done without you," he said quietly. Aeon looked at him, her expression softening. "You don't need to worry about that," she said. "You're here safe, that's what matters." Despite the danger and exhaustion, James felt a strange sense of peace. He was no longer alone. He had been rescued, cared for, and protected by someone whose bravery and kindness he would never forget. He realized that this moment, this day in the canyon, was changing him, teaching him about trust, humility, and the power of quiet courage. Aeon stayed with him through the night, making sure he was comfortable and safe. She had acted quickly, decisively, and without hesitation, saving him from what could have been a deadly situation. And James, though tired and still weak, couldn't stop thinking about the strange, unexpected bond that had formed between them. It was not just survival, it was connection, built on respect, care, and the shared experience of facing danger together. As the night deepened, James closed his eyes, feeling safe in a way he hadn't felt in years. He knew the desert could be unforgiving, but he also knew that with Aeon by his side, even just for today, he had a chance to face it, survive it, and perhaps even understand it better. And somewhere deep in his heart, he felt a quiet gratitude that went beyond words, for the woman who had saved his life and had stayed beside him, calm and steady, through it all. The first rays of sunlight crept over the canyon walls, turning the desert sky into soft shades of pink and orange. The coolness of early morning replaced the heavy heat of the day, and James Whitmore slowly began to stir. He blinked against the light, his head still tender from the fall, but he felt stronger than he had the day before. His body no longer ached as sharply, and the fear that had gripped him yesterday was slowly replaced by a cautious awareness. As he opened his eyes fully, he saw Aeon sitting a few feet away, quietly tending to a small fire she had kept alive through the night. She moved with careful precision, her dark hair falling over her shoulders, catching the first light of morning. James' gaze lingered on her for a moment. He realized that without her, he might not have survived the canyon. A wave of gratitude washed over him, and yet a small spark of embarrassment nudged at the edges of his thoughts. He tried to sit up, testing his strength, but his body reminded him gently that it was still weak. Aeon noticed immediately. "Easy," she said softly, moving toward him. "You've gained some strength, but don't push too fast. Let your body catch up to your mind." James nodded, feeling a little sheepish. He had always prided himself on his ability to endure hardship, to handle whatever the ranch, or life, threw at him. But now he realized he had been completely dependent on someone else's care. And that someone was this young Apache woman who had appeared like a guardian angel in the middle of the desert. "You're awake," Aeon said, her tone calm but with a hint of relief. "How are you feeling?" "Better, "Much better," James replied, his voice still raspy. "Thanks to you." Aeon smiled faintly, but she didn't say anything about the compliment. She was more focused on making sure he was comfortable. She handed him a small water bottle and motioned for him to drink slowly. James obeyed, appreciating her patient guidance. The water revived him, easing the dryness of his throat and giving him the energy to focus. Once he had taken a few sips, James looked around at his surroundings more carefully than before. The canyon, now illuminated in the morning light, looked both beautiful and harsh. The rocks glistened in the sun and the sparse desert plants cast long shadows across the ground. He realized how close he had come to real danger. The thought made him shiver slightly, and he turned to Aeon instinctively. You really saved me," he said quietly. "I don't think I would have made it if you hadn't been here." Aeon's expression remained calm, but her eyes softened. "You would have had a hard time," she said simply. "The canyon is unforgiving and the sun can be dangerous. You were lucky I was nearby, that's all." James felt a mixture of humility and curiosity. He had heard stories of the Apache people, of their strength and connection to the land, but he had never truly experienced it until now. He wanted to know more about Aeon, about her skills, her life, and how she had come to be in the canyon at the right moment. You were gathering herbs," he asked. "Did you come here often?" "Yes," Aeon replied. "I know these lands well. My family has lived here for generations. I've learned how to read the land, to find water, to move quietly and safely. I didn't expect to find anyone in trouble, but when I heard you groaning, I knew I had to help." James nodded slowly, impressed by her knowledge and courage. He had spent his whole life on this ranch, yet Aeon's understanding of the desert seemed far deeper than his. It was not just survival, it was a connection, a harmony with the land that he had never truly experienced. For a moment there was silence between them, broken only by the crackle of the small fire. Then James remembered something from the previous day. A small smile tugged at his lips, mixed with surprise and embarrassment. "You kissed me while I was out cold," he said, his tone a little nervous, unsure how to frame it. Aeon looked at him steadily, her dark eyes calm and unflinching. She did not blush, she did not hesitate. "I saved your life, sir," she replied simply. Her voice carried pride and certainty. It was not a flirtatious remark, it was a statement of fact, of responsibility, of courage. James felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, gratitude, admiration, and a little embarrassment. He had never experienced anything like this before. Here was a young woman who had risked her time, energy, and safety to ensure his survival. And she had done it with quiet confidence and grace, without expecting anything in return. The moment passed, and they returned to the practical matters of the morning. Aeon encouraged James to eat a little, and he accepted some dried corn and nuts she had saved from yesterday. The simple meal gave him more strength, and he realized how thoughtful she had been in preparing for every possibility. Water, food, shade, rest. She had considered all of it without hesitation. After breakfast, James tried to stand again. His legs wobbled, but with Aeon's steady hand supporting him, he managed to take a few cautious steps. "Slowly," she instructed, guiding him across the rocky terrain. "You're stronger, but your body is still recovering." As he moved, James couldn't help but notice the way she navigated the canyon. Every step was careful and precise. She pointed out small details: the safest rocks to step on, the hidden patches of loose sand, the signs of wildlife nearby. Her awareness of the land was astonishing, and he felt a growing admiration for her skills. They spent the morning together, moving slowly toward a safer part of the canyon where James could rest more comfortably. Along the way, they talked, sharing small details about their lives. James learned about Aeon's family, her upbringing, and the lessons she had learned from generations of Apache ancestors. She spoke with quiet pride about her heritage, about the respect for the land and the knowledge passed down through careful observation and experience. James, in turn, shared some of his life on the ranch, his responsibilities, his challenges, and the solitude he often felt. He spoke of his cattle, the endless work of maintaining the land, and the pride he felt in providing for his property. Aeon listened with interest, nodding occasionally, her eyes thoughtful. Though their worlds were different, a bridge of understanding was forming between them. By late morning, they reached a small plateau overlooking the canyon. The view was breathtaking, and James took a moment to take it all in. The desert stretched for miles, its rugged beauty both harsh and mesmerizing. He felt a sense of awe, but also a profound respect for Aeon, whose knowledge and courage had saved him from becoming just another story lost to the desert sands. You really saved my life," he said again, this time with deeper sincerity. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Aeon shook her head gently. "You don't need to repay me," she said. "Knowing you are alive is enough. That's all that matters." James looked at her, feeling a warmth in his chest. He had expected gratitude, perhaps even relief, but he hadn't expected the quiet strength and humility she exuded. He realized that her actions were not motivated by recognition or reward. They were motivated by instinct, by a deep understanding of responsibility and care. The hours passed and the sun climbed higher. James felt stronger with each step, each moment of guidance from Aeon. The canyon, once a place of danger and fear, now felt less threatening because of her presence. He trusted her, and in that trust, he found a sense of comfort he had not known in a long time. As the day moved toward noon, James and Aeon found a suitable spot to rest. They sat together in the shade, sharing water and speaking quietly about the canyon, the land, and their lives. There was a sense of calm between them, a connection formed not through words alone, but through shared experience, mutual respect, and the unspoken understanding that life was fragile and precious. James realized something important. This encounter, this rescue, had changed him. He had faced danger, relied on someone else completely, and survived. But more than that, he had discovered a connection, a respect, and perhaps the beginning of a bond that went beyond survival. And he knew that he would never forget Aeon, the young Apache woman who had saved his life, who had stayed by his side, and who had shown him courage, wisdom, and care unlike anything he had ever known. The sun rose higher in the sky, turning the canyon into a warm, golden landscape. James Whitmore had grown stronger since the day before. His head no longer throbbed as sharply, and the dizziness that had plagued him had faded. He could move with more confidence, although every step reminded him of how vulnerable he had been. Aeon noticed the improvement and smiled quietly, proud that he was recovering so well. "You've come a long way since yesterday," she said gently. "Your body is stronger now and your mind seems clearer too." James smiled, feeling a sense of relief. "I owe it all to you," he admitted. "I never thought someone could be so calm and so skilled. You saved my life and I can't thank you enough." Aeon shook her head. "You don't need to thank me," she said softly. "What matters is that you're here, alive, and able to move forward. That's enough for me." Her words made James reflect on how unusual and rare such selflessness was. He had grown up learning to handle his own problems, to rely on himself. He had always thought that needing someone else was a weakness. But now he realized that trusting someone, relying on them when life demanded it, was not weakness at all. It was courage. And Aeon had shown him that courage quietly, without words, simply through her actions. They began walking together along a safer path through the canyon. James leaned on her for support at first, but with each step, he felt his confidence returning. Aeon walked with him, guiding him carefully, pointing out safer spots to step and hidden patches of loose sand that could make him stumble. Her awareness of the land was astonishing. She moved lightly, almost as if she were part of the desert itself, and James watched her with awe. "You move so easily through this land," he said after a moment. "It's like you belong here." Aeon glanced at him, a small smile forming on her lips. "I do," she said. "I've lived here all my life. I know these lands better than most. Every stone, every plant, every shadow has meaning. You learn to respect it, to understand it. It gives you guidance if you listen carefully." James nodded slowly, thinking about how little he truly understood the land he had worked on all his life. He had learned to manage the ranch, to care for the cattle, and to work hard, but he had never truly felt the deep connection Aeon described. Watching her, listening to her words, he realized that she carried wisdom and strength that he had only just begun to understand. As they walked, they began to talk more freely. Aeon shared stories of her family, of growing up learning the ways of the land, and of the lessons passed down from her ancestors. She spoke of tracking animals, finding water in unexpected places, and using the desert's resources to survive. James listened intently, fascinated by her knowledge and her calm confidence. In turn, James told her about his life on the ranch. He spoke of the endless work required to maintain the land, the challenges of raising cattle, and the satisfaction of seeing a job well done. He admitted that life on the ranch could be lonely, that the vastness of the land often left him with only his own thoughts for company. Aeon listened quietly, nodding, her eyes thoughtful. "You work hard," she said finally. "I can see why the land is important to you. But you also need to learn to see it, not just manage it. The desert gives more than it takes if you respect it." James considered her words. He had always seen the land as a place of work and responsibility, not as a teacher or a guide. But with Aeon's presence and guidance, he began to notice small things he had overlooked before. The way the wind moved through the canyon, the patterns of shadows cast by the rocks, the soft hum of life in the desert that often went unnoticed. They stopped for a moment near a small stream that trickled through the canyon. The water was cool and refreshing, and Aeon gestured for James to drink. "Stay hydrated," she reminded him. "The sun can be harsh and your body still needs care." James drank deeply, appreciating not just the water but the gentle attention Aeon gave him. It was not just care, it was respect, thoughtfulness, and understanding. He realized that she was not merely helping him recover. She was teaching him to see the desert, to move through it safely, and to respect it as she did. After resting by the stream, Aeon suggested they explore a nearby ridge. The climb was gentle, and James found himself enjoying the walk more than he had expected. With each step, he felt stronger, more confident, and more aware of the subtle beauty around him. He noticed patterns in the rocks, colors in the sand, and the delicate growth of desert plants. Aeon pointed out these details, sharing small lessons about the land that James found surprisingly absorbing. "You see this?" she said, pointing to a small patch of wildflowers growing between the rocks. "These flowers grow only where the soil is just right and the water reaches them. They teach patience, resilience. Even in harsh conditions, life finds a way." James smiled, watching the delicate petals glint in the sunlight. "I've been so focused on surviving and managing the land I never noticed things like this," he admitted. "It's beautiful," Aeon nodded. "The land teaches those who listen. It rewards those who respect it. You are learning slowly, but you are learning." As the morning turned into afternoon, James began to see more of Aeon's personality beyond her courage and skill. She was quiet, thoughtful, and deeply observant, but she also had a playful side. Small jokes slipped from her lips now and then, and her laughter, soft and melodic, seemed to harmonize with the desert around them. James found himself smiling more often than he had in months, feeling a warmth he hadn't realized he was missing. During a brief rest, James asked her, "Have you always lived here?" "Yes," Aeon replied. "The desert has always been my home. My family taught me how to survive, how to respect the land, and how to live with it, not against it. It's not always easy, but it's rewarding." James reflected on that. He had grown up on a ranch and knew hard work, but Aeon's connection to her home was different. It was more than work. It was harmony, understanding, and balance. He realized that he had much to learn, not just about the land, but about life itself. As they continued their walk, they encountered a herd of deer grazing in a nearby clearing. Aeon motioned for James to stay quiet. Together, they observed the animals, noticing how they moved, how they paused at the slightest sound, how the light touched their coats. James was amazed at her ability to blend into the environment and move without disturbing the wildlife. He understood now that her skills went beyond survival. They were about connection, patience, and respect. "You have a gift," he said quietly. "Not just for survival, but for seeing life in a way I never could." Aeon looked at him with a small, modest smile. "I learned it from my family," she said, "and from the land itself. Anyone can learn if they are willing to listen." By the time they returned to a safe resting spot, James realized how much he had grown in just 2 days. He was stronger, more aware, and more appreciative of the world around him. But more importantly, he felt a growing bond with Aeon, a connection built on trust, respect, and shared experience. Sitting together in the shade, James realized that he had found something unexpected. He had come to the canyon expecting a day of work, only to face danger, fear, and uncertainty. But he had also found courage, guidance, and the beginnings of a friendship he could not ignore. Aeon had shown him kindness without expectation, wisdom without arrogance, and courage without hesitation. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the canyon, James looked at Aeon and felt a quiet admiration. "I've learned more from you in these 2 days than I ever thought I could," he said sincerely. Aeon smiled softly. "You've been willing to learn. That makes all the difference." James nodded, feeling a deep respect for her that went beyond gratitude. He understood now that this experience had changed him, not just physically, but in his understanding of trust, courage, and connection. And as night fell over the canyon, he knew that the bond formed between them would endure, built on shared experience, respect, and the quiet understanding that life was precious and fragile, and sometimes it was saved by the kindness and bravery of another. The next morning, the canyon was bathed in soft, golden light. James Whitmore awoke feeling more rested than he had in days. His body was no longer weak, and the dizziness that had once made him fear the desert had completely faded. As he stretched carefully, he realized that he could move freely now, standing without assistance from Aeon. A sense of relief and gratitude filled him. He had survived the fall, survived the heat, and survived because of her presence. Aeon was already awake, tending to the small fire she had kept burning overnight. She noticed James stirring and smiled softly. "Good morning," she said. "You look much stronger today." James returned the smile, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. "Thanks to you," he replied. "I couldn't have made it without your help. I don't think I've ever been in a situation like this before. You saved my life and I will never forget it." Aeon shook her head gently. "You don't need to thank me. I only did what anyone would do if they were able. What matters is that you're here, safe, and ready to continue." James looked around the canyon, taking in the landscape with new eyes. Yesterday, the terrain had seemed harsh and threatening, but now it seemed alive, full of beauty and hidden wonders. He realized that Aeon had not just saved him physically. She had opened his eyes to the desert in a way he had never experienced before. Every rock, every plant, every shadow now held meaning. He had gained a new respect for the land, for life, and for the quiet, patient people who truly understood it. After a simple breakfast of dried corn and water, Aeon helped James prepare for the journey back to the safer parts of the canyon. She guided him carefully, pointing out the safest paths and teaching him to watch for loose stones, uneven ground, and sudden drops. James followed her instructions closely, feeling stronger and more confident with every step. As they walked, James couldn't help but reflect on how much he had learned from Aeon in just a few days. She had shown him courage, care, patience, and wisdom. She had taught him how to respect the land, how to observe without disturbing, and how to remain calm even in the face of danger. For someone who had always relied on his own strength, this was a lesson he would carry with him forever. "Your skills are incredible," James said at one point. "I've worked on this land all my life, but I've never seen anyone move through it like you. You're amazing." Aeon glanced at him, her expression calm and modest. "I learned from my family and the land itself," she said. "Anyone can learn if they are willing to listen and observe. It's about patience, respect, and understanding." James nodded thoughtfully. He had always valued hard work and strength, but he realized now that wisdom and awareness were equally important. Aeon had taught him that courage was not just about facing danger. It was about preparation, observation, and careful action. By midday, they reached a small plateau that overlooked a wide stretch of the canyon. James paused to rest, taking in the view. The land stretched for miles, rugged yet beautiful, alive with the quiet sounds of nature. He felt a deep sense of peace here, a connection to the world around him that he had never felt before. Aeon sat beside him, her gaze sweeping the landscape. "The desert can be harsh," she said quietly, "but it also gives life if you know how to see it. You have learned a little of that in the past 2 days. Remember it." James looked at her, admiration shining in his eyes. "I will," he said sincerely. "You've shown me more than I could have imagined. You've changed how I see the land and even how I see myself." Aeon smiled softly, though her eyes held a quiet seriousness. "Remember, strength is not just about the body. It's about the mind, the heart, and the choices we make. You survived because you trusted, because you stayed calm, and because you allowed help when you needed it. That is strength too." James reflected on her words. He had always valued independence, believing that relying on others was a sign of weakness. But now he understood that true strength included trust, humility, and the ability to accept care when necessary. Aeon had taught him this lesson without ever demanding anything in return. As the afternoon sun climbed high, they began the final stretch back to the ranch's safer terrain. James walked with renewed energy, his body fully recovered and his mind clear. Aeon walked beside him, her presence steady and reassuring. They moved in silence at first, each taking in the beauty of the desert and the quiet harmony that surrounded them. Eventually, James broke the silence. "I don't know how to explain it," he said thoughtfully. "You didn't just save my life. You helped me see things I never noticed before. You've taught me lessons I will never forget." Aeon's expression softened. "That is why I do what I do," she said. "To help, to guide, to protect, and to share what I have learned. Life is precious and we must respect it. You have learned that now." They reached the edge of the canyon, where the land leveled out, and James could see his ranch in the distance. The familiar buildings, the cattle grazing in the pastures, and the fences he had worked so hard to maintain all seemed to welcome him back. He felt a wave of relief and gratitude. He had survived, learned, and grown, and Aeon had been there for every step of the journey. "You've done more than I can ever thank you for," James said, his voice filled with emotion. "I will never forget you, Aeon. You've changed my life." Aeon shook her head gently, her eyes calm but kind. "You don't need to thank me," she repeated. "The important thing is that you live fully, respect the land, and carry these lessons forward." James nodded, understanding the depth of her words. He realized that Aeon's guidance went beyond the immediate danger. She had helped him see life differently, to value connection, trust, and the quiet strength of those who live in harmony with the land. Before they parted ways, James extended his hand, and Aeon shook it firmly. "I hope one day I can repay you," he said sincerely. Aeon smiled. "Just live well," she replied. "That is enough." As Aeon disappeared back into the desert, James watched her go, feeling a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and quiet longing. He knew he would never forget her, the courage, wisdom, and kindness she had shown him in the most challenging days of his life. He also knew that he had changed, not just as a rancher, but as a person who had learned the value of trust, care, and connection. Returning to his ranch, James felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fences, the cattle, the daily work, they were all important, but now he saw them with a new perspective. The land was not just a source of work, it was a teacher, a provider, and a guide. And in that understanding, he carried Aeon's lessons with him, knowing that her impact would remain with him forever. Days turned into weeks, but James often found himself thinking of Aeon. He remembered her steady hands, her calm voice, and the simple but profound words she had shared. He thought of the canyon, the stream, and the sunlit rocks. Every time he worked on the ranch, he carried with him the lessons of observation, patience, and respect. And though Aeon had returned to her own life in the desert, a quiet bond remained between them. It was a connection born of courage, care, and shared experience, a reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, kindness and bravery could change lives. James knew that he had been given more than a second chance at life. He had been given perspective, wisdom, and a deep respect for the world around him. And in that, he realized that the most important lessons were often found in the quiet moments, the acts of courage and care, and the people who teach us to see the beauty in life, even in the most unexpected places. As the sun set over the ranch, casting warm light across the fields, James stood on the porch of his home and looked out at the land. The desert stretched beyond, endless and beautiful, full of life and lessons waiting to be discovered. He smiled, thinking of Aeon and the canyon, and he felt a quiet peace. He had survived, he had learned, and he had been changed forever by the bravery and kindness of one remarkable young woman. And though the canyon was behind him, the lessons, the bond, and the gratitude would stay with him always, a reminder that life's true strength lies not only in survival but in trust, care, and the courage to act when it matters most.